Hello, everyone. I'm embedding this lecture in here so we can have it ready to go. And no matter where you are, what you're doing, you can get these notes. I'm covering lesson 10.2 today, and we've already had one lecture on the New Deal, and this one's going to be on our second one on the New Deal. And this is an assignment that also includes a video on from History Channel on the Great Depression for 6 notes, a video on the WPA. We're going to talk about that today for 6 notes, and a newspaper article that's pretty cool about how Ventura High has a definite connection to the New Deal, and it's one of the cool things about our school. So let's get started. I've got 10 notes for you. These are the real heavy hitters of the New Deal. Today is the meat and potatoes of the New Deal, good or bad. And I've been around enough conservative people, although I'm not one myself, to realize there's a real logic in what they say. I may not agree with it, and conservatives don't necessarily agree with me, but there's another side to this. So let's get going. All right, my first point is the 1936 election. The 1936 election. And remember that this is one of 4 elections that President Roosevelt won. His first one was in 1932. His second one was in 1936. His third one was in 1940. And his last one was in 1944. It's one of the things that makes him so unique, because that can't happen again without a constitutional change. So this was the second election he won. It was him, Roosevelt, for the Democrats versus Alf Landon, Landon of Kansas. And this is Roosevelt's biggest victory of the 4. He had joined together a coalition of voters that really hadn't been together again previously in the Democratic Party. Labor, African Americans, farmers now. This coalition was pretty broad, pretty big. That gives him that kind of victory. It included all kinds of religions, from Catholics, Jewish people, to Protestants. It just was a huge coalition. And the 1936 election was his biggest and one of the biggest landslides of all time. Alf Landon only got 8 electorals to 523 for Roosevelt. The New Deal was really setting in by 1936, and a lot of positives were starting to change. Unemployment was still up. There were still people unemployed. But that's about to change. That's about to change with the thing we're going to talk about today. So my first note was the 1936 election. Hopefully you got the 2 people who ran against each other. It was Roosevelt's biggest landslide victory of the 4. All right, my second note is more agricultural help. Roosevelt spent a lot of time in Georgia. Remember, we've already spoken that he had polio, and there were some hot springs down there. That's actually where he's going to pass away when he dies. And he learned a lot about agricultural issues on his trips down there. He wasn't an agricultural person. He's from New York City, but Hyde Park, New York. But that's really where he learned a lot about what was going on and the problems in the agricultural areas. In our last note, we spoke about how the AAA, that big law to help farmers, had been struck down by the Supreme Court. And Roosevelt moved quickly to get new laws passed in. The 1936 Soil Conservation Act was basically the same thing without some of the negatives as the AAA. In 1938, there was a second AAA, which was a little bit more constitutional and didn't have the opposition of the Supreme Court. 1937 Farm Settlement Administration. This one's a big one because one of the things about the agricultural stuff that Roosevelt did, he didn't reach down to the lowest of the farmers, the tenant farmers, the migrant workers. So in this last one, the 1937 Farm Settlement Administration, Roosevelt really reached down with $1 billion for tenant farmers, housing for migrant workers out in California, a lot of the Okies. Once again, agriculture could be overlooked at times, but it definitely wasn't by Roosevelt. And in his second 100 days, in his second New Deal, he definitely sought more help for farmers across our nation. That was our second note. Okay, our third note, of the works programs. Remember, there's the 3 R's, and this would be the recovery. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, is our third note. Now, this is the biggest work program that he had going on, the WPA. It started in 1935. About 8 million workers. They were given $11 billion. The workers made anywhere from $15 to $90 a month. It's a massive program for jobs. It ended in 1943 when most of the workers now were fighting in Europe or Asia. So remember, the recovery programs were programs to give our people jobs here in the United States, but not last forever. And this included, the WPA included everyone. Artists, writers, sculptors. Yes, they built a lot of things like Ventura High, but it included all kinds of different workers. Theater. This is really where it starts to reach into young people, minorities, women. It's a huge program. You've got a video on it, so I guess I don't have to go too much more in depth. And you've got the reading from Ventura High is on there, because that's, if you ever go into the post office downtown, the mural there is a WPA mural. A massive program. A massive program. Our third note was the WPA. Of the 3 R's, it's the recovery. And it's the biggest one. Okay, our fourth note is the National Youth Administration. National Youth Administration. Now, on our first set of notes, we talked about the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, which took young people from 18 to 25, put a shovel in their hands, put a pickaxe in their hands, a saw, whatever, and gave them $30 a month, 25 of which went to their families. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. Of the two, this was more cities. This is more college kids. This is more job experience. Didn't live out in camps like the CCC. The NYA 1935, counseling and recreation for young people, student aid for kids in college and kids who needed help of that age, part-time work. Some of them were jobs, but the NYA would be much more of a work experience where you lived at home, you went to school, you had a job. And the NYA, a huge program, and it also included African Americans. This is, we studied Woodrow Wilson, where he kind of turned his back on African Americans, and his legacy is paying a price now, huh? Roosevelt wasn't quite like that, but he could have done more, I think. Mary McLeod Bethune, is on the test, and she's a member of the Black Cabinet that Roosevelt called, and he was the lead. She was the leader of the Negro Affairs Division of the NYA. A fabulous life. Her parents were slaves, and she rose up to greatness in American history. Mary McLeod Bethune. Jot that name down. We've got two massive programs on notes 3 and 4, a little bit different. The WPA, and your fourth note, the National Youth Administration. Okay, we're shifting gears here a little bit now, and we're going to organize labor. The Wagner Act. The Wagner Act. National Labor Relations Act. The thinking here was, like the one video brought up, one of the ways to get the Depression over with is to have more spending for the common man, for the common middle class person, or one man or woman. And so getting more pay, more benefits would help our economy. That's the overall thinking. Plus, there's also the thinking, let's avoid strikes. So what this mammoth law did is it legalized and protected unions and collective bargaining. It reestablished a fairness for that. It outlawed unfair practices by companies towards their labor. It set up the National Labor Relations Board, which settled issues. And unionism went up. I don't know where unionism is in your family. It's not as prominent as it used to be. I'm a union member. I don't know if your parents are. There's pluses and minuses. We have some teachers who don't like being in the union, but you have to be. So there's a lot of things to talk about unionism on a plus minus side. But the fact is, the Wagner Act and the National Labor Relations Board, here's your big note here, is it established government, once again government, as the referee of labor issues. It had never been that much before. It had done some, but it never had the title until the Wagner Act and the National Labor Relations Board. And unionism went up in the 30s, up to about 9 million union members. All right, our fifth note dealt with labor. It dealt with unionism, the Wagner Act, historic act in labor relations. Our sixth note is a lot like that one, the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, this was in 1938, but it went a little beyond unionism. The Fair Labor Standards Act created a maximum work week. Originally, it was 44 hours a week, and then it went to 40 hours a week. And if you work over that, you're supposed to get overtime. It established a maximum work week. It established a minimum wage. A lot of you work in jobs where the wages are, subject to this kind of a thing. It started out at 25 cents an hour. It established a bottom age for people who could be working. 16, we know that, and 18 for any kind of hazardous work. So the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 went a little beyond the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act was almost exclusively dealing with unions, whereas this included all workers. And we still have the effects today. If you go in any workplace, they've got to have a poster up there that talks about the minimum wage in whatever state someone's in. So our fifth and sixth notes dealt with labor, the Wagner Act or the National Labor Relations Act, and our sixth note was the Fair Labor Standards Act. Our seventh note is if I had to say, someone said, Larson, what's the biggest thing that the New Deal did? It was the Social Security Act. So I've got 3 notes on this one. The Social Security Act, and I think President Roosevelt learned a lot from Dr. Francis Townsend, who criticized him. Sometimes someone who's critical of you, you can learn something from them. I like when you guys gave me those evaluations of the beginnings of this course. I really learned. I'm willing to listen anytime. The Social Security Act of 1935 is probably one of the most historic laws in the history of the United States. I mean, it really is. It's a game changer. It's a game changer. And it includes 3 parts. So let's get going with this. I could go on and on. And the first one is retirement insurance. We've got 3 notes on the Social Security Act of 1935, and the first one is retirement insurance. Where do I begin? It's a half-half deal. So if you get SSA and they take it out of your check, and they take out $25 from your check, the owner has to pay $25. So you build an account in SSA, Social Security Administration, for your future retirement. It's an insurance supplemental plan. There are some groups that were excluded and still are excluded. Not everyone has this. Most people do. 90% of Americans do. It meant retirement checks for millions of Americans. Millions of Americans. You can get it now at 65, I believe. I'm not quite there yet. I'm not quite 65. The number one feature of the Social Security Act of 1935 is retirement insurance. And that is our 7th note. Our 8th note, the second feature of the Social Security Act was unemployment insurance. This is the concept of government assistance. Like I said in our first notes, this is something Roosevelt reluctantly agreed to. This system is funded by tax on the employer. So let's say I work for McDonald's. McDonald's has to pay a tax for my work so that if I get hurt, I get paid. And employers don't like this so much, this unemployment tax, but it's a feature of American companies that's there to stay. The money goes to the state. So let's say that $1,000 goes to Washington and it comes back to the state. So it's state system. Although it's funded by the federal government, the unemployment system set up gets money to people who lost their job, had issues, had been work. Disability would be another feature of this. Hurt on the job. Our 8th note overall, and our second note on the Social Security Act of 1935 is unemployment insurance. And our last one, I think some of you know this and some may not. The Social Security Act is there for disabled people. The Social Security Act of 1935 reached down to I don't want to be negative here, but the people who needed it the most. The mentally challenged, the handicapped, and they got a paycheck. They got money. The Social Security Act of 1935 was meant as a safety net to keep at least people who are struggling for whatever reason, old age, disability, unemployment, physical handicaps, and keep them going. It's not as much as it should be, the money that they get, but it's there for them. I've got a brother-in-law who gets a check from Social Security every month. Aid to families. of disability, children of disability, people with disabilities. Once again, it's federal funds that go to the states. The Social Security Act of 1935 is a massive, massive program. And you get a number. You get a number. Don't give that number out. Very reluctantly give that number out. That is kind of your name in college. They don't post your name. They'll post the last four of your social. So, okay, our 10th note is another one that Roosevelt really cared about, and I think he learned a lot about it in his trips to Georgia. Roosevelt was able to keep the Southerners in his Democratic Party, and though there's some racism going on down there, and Roosevelt was not a racist. He could have done more, but he's not a racist. Utility regulation. Once again, we talked about the TVA last week, or in our last set of notes. Rural electrification was an issue because electricity was not reaching out to the farms. In 1945, only 48% of farms had electricity. By 1949, thanks to Roosevelt, 90% had electricity. They're also looking to regulate electricity and keep it controlled. Roosevelt really sought to bring this feature of life to American agriculture, to their farms, and to the rural areas. And he did. He definitely did. So it goes 1935, 12% of farms had electricity, 1945, 48%, and then 1949, 90%. The Rural Electrification Act brought electricity to rural areas. All right, those are my 10 notes. This is the meat and potatoes of the New Deal. The CCC is important. We talked about that. But when you talk about the WPA, the NYA, the Wagner Act, this is what makes the New Deal the New Deal. So I hope everyone has a great holiday season. It's been a rough year. It's been a rough year for our family too. I'm really going to miss you. I hope to see all of you soon. It's been a weird year getting to know you through this kind of relationship, teacher-student, but we're doing the best we can, aren't we? We're doing the best we can. All right, you need 10 notes from this. I gave you a note, didn't I? I did. You need 10 notes. You need 6 notes from the History Channel, Great Depression video. You need 6 notes from the WPA video and the really cool newspaper article. You may not have realized it, but our high school has connections to the New Deal. All right. God bless everyone. I hope everyone has a great holiday season, and I'll see you again in 2021.